All right. Well, it's about 4 minutes after. We'll go ahead and get started. Okay. One thing that I wanted to go back to week one, because one of the first questions was, why did God make light first? And then I was listening to a podcast that pointed out this graph that you see here on those first 7 days. What we see is God bringing order out of the chaos and land out of the water and light out of darkness. And so I thought this was a pretty neat thing. What we see in the first 3 days is God forming things. In other words, it was without form when he first created it, in a chaotic state. And so he forms or creates light in day one. And then corresponding to that, in day 4, he fills his creation. So he created light, and then in day 4, he created the sun, moon, and stars to give light. And then in day 2, he separated the waters and the sky. In other words, he formed those things, but then he, in day 5, fills the seas and the air with fish and birds. And then on day 3, he brings the land out of the waters. He gives boundaries to the land. And so we have land now. And then in day 6, you see that he fills the land with animals and creates humans. And I thought that was a really excellent way of seeing the order of creation and the purpose of creation, and kind of the beauty, I guess, and the balance that we find in those first few verses of Genesis. Okay, so I will try to remember to send that out. I'll recreate week one's lesson or answers and send that back out. You should have I emailed you the reading, and it includes weeks 1, 2, and 3. So instead of just doing 1 week, I'm just adding to that one document. So I'll just create it. And then at the end, I'll send you a document that has all 4 weeks in it. Good questions this week, and a lot fewer questions this week. So hopefully we won't be on here an hour this week. I appreciate your patience last week. Question number 1. Why would Abraham say that Sarah is his sister? Would he really have been killed so that access could be granted to her? It's really difficult in our day and age to grasp the dangerous situations of people living in Abraham's day would face. And I would say even prior to Abraham's day, if we would go back in even United States history, 150 years ago, when they're settling the West and there's no law and that type of thing, and there's no real good means of communication, how dangerous it would be if you come upon somebody that didn't have good intentions. So I put down there was no 911, no phones of any kind, no GPS, no internet, no newspapers or any such things. Cities might have had some form of police, but it would have been controlled by the powerful men of the city or the king. And so you were just up to the character of that king, if he was benevolent or not. If he was malevolent, then you could easily have problems. And for a nomad like Abraham, remember, Abraham was sojourning. He was not staying in any one place. He was going from place to place, grazing his sheep and goats as he went. If he had to be his own protection. And if someone at a certain city were to kill him, the people in other cities would just assume that he wasn't stopping back in. I mean, he would just kind of disappear from the face of the earth, and people might think about him, but they wouldn't check on him or anything like that. And we have to remember that this was a time before the law was given. One city might have some code of conduct, while another city may simply do as they pleased. But regardless, the king had total power. We use the word despot for someone that's in total power. He did whatever he wanted, and with our sinful nature, that's not a good thing. It was a dangerous time, and if somebody wanted something of yours, not just your wife, but if somebody wanted anything of yours, there was always the potential that they'd simply kill you and take it. And it's one of the reasons why covenants were a very serious thing. They would covenant with one another not to cause harm to one another and not to betray one another. And that was an important part of ancient times. And it's why, coveting is something that was in the Ten Commandments. You're not to covet your neighbor's wife and things like that. So if Sarah was a very beautiful woman, and they were just traveling through or passing through, and somebody wanted her, they certainly could have taken her. So it was a real threat. Abraham offering or saying that Sarah was his sister happened twice. What would the time frame be for each? Like once they entered the land, how long would it be before Sarah was taken? The king found out the truth and those type of things. And then the questioner says, we know nothing was ever consummated, but did either king actually marry Sarah? Well, we're not told how long these events took to happen. And I doubt that either king married Sarah. She more than likely would have been brought into the king's harem. Different accounts give different things, but sometimes when a woman was brought into a king's harem, there would be a time of purification or setting her aside to be cleaned and given proper attire and different things like that. And so I don't think that there was a marriage. We're not told, but I think it would probably just been a situation of bringing them into the king or Pharaoh's harem. Next question, really good question here. Was Lot a good man? Did Lot believe and follow after God, or did he just go along with Abraham? Now, to answer this question, I'm going to, instead of using the word good, let's use the word righteous, because Lot was certainly a sinner, and the scriptures tell us no one is good, no, not one. The question becomes is whether Lot at some point had the same faith in God as Abraham had in Genesis 15:6, and thus being counted as righteous. Now, we're never told about Lot placing his faith in God. However, it must have happened at some point, but it's just not recorded for us in Genesis. And we know that because of a statement Abraham makes there in Genesis 18:23 through 25. This is when the Lord has appeared to Abraham with the two angels, and he's kind of bargaining with God is what we typically call it. He's really just discussing with God what's going to happen to these cities and the righteous people. And it says, then Abraham drew near and said, will you indeed sweep away the righteous with the wicked? Suppose there are 50 righteous within the city. Will you then sweep away the place and not spare it for the 50 righteous who are in it? And then he says this, far be it from you to do such a thing, to put the righteous to death with the wicked, so that the righteous fare as the wicked. Far be that from you. Shall not the judge of all the earth do what is just? And so Abraham is appealing to God's justice and God's character and in that passage. And then later on, after Sodom is destroyed, we read in Genesis 19:29, it says, so it was that when God destroyed the cities of the valley, God remembered Abraham and sent Lot out of the midst of the overthrow when he overthrew the cities in which Lot had lived. Now, why would God have sent Lot out? Well, it was because Lot was righteous. Abraham appealed. He says, are you going to destroy the righteous with the unrighteous? And far be it from God to do that. And God took that as a request from Abraham, and he took Lot out. And so therefore, we, using logic, see that at some point Lot had been considered righteous. And the Apostle Peter picks up on that in 2 Peter 2, verses 7 through 9. And he says, and if he, that is the Lord, if he rescued righteous Lot, greatly distressed by the sensual conduct of the wicked, for as that righteous man lived among them day after day, he was tormenting his righteous soul over their lawless deeds that he saw and heard. And that's, again, back to Sunday's, or this morning's sermon. Be careful, little eyes, what you see. Be careful, little ears, what you hear. He is vexing his soul by what he saw and what he heard. And he says in verse 9, he goes on to say, then the Lord knows how to rescue the godly from trials and to keep the unrighteous under punishment until the day of judgment. And I just copied from the notes that you had there and what to look for. Peter calls to remembrance the destruction of Sodom and the rescue of Lot to assure us that false teachers will be judged, while the saints, or the righteous ones, though tormented by the things they see and hear, will be rescued. Okay. Any questions on that one? And just unmute and jump in. Okay. Next question. Was it a sin of disobedience that Abraham brought Lot along in Genesis 12:1? And it's a good question, because God said you need to get out of the land and separate from your family, right? But I don't think it was disobedience on Abraham's part, because it appears that Lot chose to go along with Abraham, his uncle, as Genesis 12:4 says, and Lot went with him. Instead of saying Abraham took Lot with him, it says Lot went with him. So it appears that Lot made the choice to go along with his uncle. And it makes sense, because Lot's dad and granddad were dead, and it would be natural for him to want to stay close to one of his uncles. And given that Abraham was childless, he probably treated his nephew Lot just like his son. I'm sure if you ask Lot who his favorite uncle was, I'm sure it was Abraham. And so I think Lot chose to go along. But Lot's presence in the story does make the reader wonder if Lot will be Abraham's heir. But the story of Lot and how they separated, once their tribes got big enough and they had to separate, and then the destruction of Sodom and the incident with his daughters, that really takes Lot out of the inheritance picture. But very good question. Then in Genesis 18, the question is, did Abraham and Sarah know that these were angels / spiritual beings? And I think they did. Only the Lord himself could promise to return to you next year, and Sarah, your wife, shall have a son. And then he identifies himself in Genesis 18:14 when he says, is anything too hard for the Lord? At the appointed time, I will return, and you'll have a child. And so certainly they knew that was the Lord. Now the Lord had brought two men with him. Did they know they were angels? I think they did. I think the purpose, because they knew their purpose was to come and to destroy a city. You're going to destroy a city with two people, they better be pretty amazing people. For some of us, we grew up watching Rambo, but even Rambo, I don't think, could take a whole city. So these angels were going to be powerful beings. Next question was, are all angels or spiritual beings male? Certainly every time an angel appears human in the Bible, it appears as a male. And the Hebrew and the Greek words that are behind the words that we use to translate angel, they're masculine words. So that leads me to believe that they are males. But at the same time, in the spiritual realm, they're not given in marriage, and there's not reproduction happening in the spiritual realm. Next question. It's a great question. Genesis 19:26. Why was Lot's wife turned into a salt pillar? And I have no idea. There's nothing that I found. There was some speculation that area is in the area of the Dead Sea, which has a high salt content in it, and that perhaps, as fire and brimstone were raining down from heaven, that it blasted Lot's wife and covered her in salt, and that's certainly a possibility. But we don't have anything that necessarily connects the, is there any symbolism to the fact that she was turned into a pillar of salt? We don't really have anything like that I'm aware of. Okay, in Genesis 19:30, why was Lot afraid of staying in the city? That's in Zoar. And I think that's an interesting statement. In other words, we're not told the reason, but I believe it was one of two things or both. Lot was told to flee to the mountains. And then he drug his feet, and he didn't want to go. And so then the angels took him outside the city, and they said, look, you need to go to the mountains. And it's at that point that Lot goes, now, wait a minute, can you send me to Zoar? It's just a small city. Please, let me go to Zoar. And so they said, okay, fine, go to Zoar. We won't destroy Zoar. But then once Lot gets there, he doesn't stay there. I mean, he flees to the city, and it says that he went into the mountains, though, instead, which is what he was supposed to do in the first place. So why was he afraid? Well, either it was one, after witnessing the destruction of Sodom, he changed his mind about living by a city when wickedness might be there. In other words, he's beginning to realize the consequences of him as a righteous man living in a very close to a city where there's wickedness going on. And so he could have been afraid to stay there for that reason. He was repentant, if you will. Or the second thing, he may have feared that destruction might eventually happen at Zoar at some point in the future. In other words, God destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah, but then later on, God would come down and destroy Zoar. That's a possibility too. I think it's number one, simply because of the consequences of Lot living in Sodom. You consider what he lost. His son-in-laws wouldn't come with him. And then he lost his wife and friends and people that he knew in that city. And I think he just feared to live near a city when that city was set up for destruction. They decided, or they allowed him to go to that city and said that they would not destroy it. So I think that's the reason Lot feared staying in the city and went and lived in the mountains like he was told to do at the first. In Genesis 20, was Abimelech a good man? Did he know God, or did God just speak and appear to him to accomplish his plan to protect and rescue Abraham and Sarah? God's appearance to a person, especially in a dream, has nothing to do with whether they are good or not. In other words, we can't say that a person is godly just because they have a dream about God, and God appears to them in a dream. That's not what saves a person in our day, and that's not what makes a person godly. Dreams are typically given in the scriptures to the spiritually immature or the unsaved, such as Abimelech here in this text, Nebuchadnezzar when he's the king in the book of Daniel. is given a dream. Pharaoh also in Egypt, when he has the dream about the famine, God is sending him a warning about the famine, but it's through a dream. Pharaoh was certainly not a righteous man. But at the same time, we also have Joseph, the husband of Mary in the New Testament. He was told to marry Mary in a dream. And he was also called a just man in Matthew 1, verses 19 through 21. So I don't think Abimelech was a good man. I think God was moving to protect Sarah and Abraham. Next question, how old was Isaac when Abraham was going to sacrifice him? Somewhere between 5 and 37. It was after he was weaned and before Sarah died. And so that's a big age range right there. More likely he was older because he made a journey with Abraham, who was well up in his years, and carried the wood for the offering up the mountain. So I don't know many 5-year-old kids that can carry up enough wood up a mountain with a 100-year-old man. I think they'd have to be older. Given Abraham's age and Isaac's strength, it is implied that Isaac offered himself willingly instead of resisting his father. In other words, he was of enough age that he could have put a whipping on his 100-year-old father and declined to be offered. I mean, you know, you're setting up an altar, you're putting the wood that you carried on it, and, you know, so he offered himself willingly. And I think that's like Christ. Christ offered himself willingly for us. I've heard pastors say before that he was in his mid-teens, like 13 to 15, but apparently commentators speculate 18 or older. And there's even one Jewish tale that talks about how he was closer to that 37 years of age, and that him being offered was one of the things that caused Sarah to have a heart attack or something like that and to pass away. And so, but that's just sheer speculation, that we don't have any scriptures on that. Any questions or comments on that? Remember, you can unmute or... All right. And last question, was Jesus crucified in the same areas that Isaac was going to be sacrificed? According to 2 Chronicles 3:1, Solomon constructed the temple on Mount Moriah in Jerusalem. And that was the mountains, mountain range that Abraham went to. And Genesis 22 doesn't specify that the sacrifice of Isaac took place or at or near Jerusalem. Verse 14 possibly implies such a connection. So, and I took that, I believe that's from the ESV Study Bible. Yeah, that's from the ESV Study Bible. And so what I would say, it was certainly in the general area. And if the temple was built on Mount Moriah, Jesus was not sacrificed in the temple. He was sacrificed outside the city, but on a place that he could look and see the temple. And so it's certainly close by would be where Isaac was offered, perhaps on the same spot. But we're just not told that, oh yes, definitely that was it. Very good. Any other questions? Or maybe somebody else has some information. You know, if you disagree, or if you have insight from other places, I'm not the only teacher here. We can learn from one another.
I had a question.
Okay.
It says that Ishmael was a wild man, but Isaac evidently was very obedient. Did Abraham not have influence in both their lives?
Well, Abraham, I think, had influence on their lives in this case. Isaac was probably around 13 when he mocked Isaac, laughing. Ishmael mocked Isaac. Yeah. So he certainly helped to raise him to a certain point. When did they finally separate and that type of thing? I don't know, but I will say this: good parenting is no guarantee of the character of the children, and we see that immediately with Jacob and Esau, right? They got the same parents. Esau is totally unconcerned about the things of God. Jacob is concerned about the things of God, and he understands the birthright and the blessing and wants them. The only problem is he's just such a deceiver. He wants to take it by deceptive means instead of just trusting the Lord. So does that answer your question?
Yeah, that's fine.
Kinda. Okay.
It's hard to say when it's not written.
Yes. Other questions or comments? Victor's looking at Rosalva. Is she asking something, Victor? And you?
Yeah.
Yes. Okay. What do we got?
I guess what happened to Lot after the incident with his daughters? Did he know that he was the father, I guess, of those babies when they were born? Or because I know after, I guess, chapter 19, after that incident happened, we don't hear about Lot anymore after that, correct?
Right. He just kind of passes from the scene. I think he's referred to in some other scriptures and things like that, but that's all in the prophets and things like that. I think he knew. I mean, because the stories that got passed along that eventually made it into Genesis were passed along from somebody, and so I think he knew. We don't really know a lot about him, but we do know that his children, I think it was Ammon and I can't remember the name of the other tribe that came. They're going to be a group where Israel was to pass through their lands when they're coming up from Egypt, and they're told not to destroy them. I mean, they're kind of related to the Israelites, and so they're kind of given a special exemption. But at the same time, there was I think some condemnation that was placed upon them, if memory serves them, because they didn't want Israel to pass through them. That, in other words, they didn't allow them to, and they were still considered related. But yeah, we just really don't know much about Lot as far as him. He just kind of passes from the scene, which so many biblical characters do. I mean, the laser focus is coming in on where Christ is coming from, right? And so we're going to see that it Abraham, and then it spreads out a little bit until we get the 12 tribes, and then it starts coming back down to Judah, and then the line of David, and then so it's funneling back down. Good question. Thanks for tuning in. I'm gonna, if I haven't already, my memory's getting bad. I think I sent out the reading for next week. If not, I'll send it out again with these notes from today. And again, if you have any questions, just send them to me, or comments. Again, we enjoy any kind of feedback, whether it's helpful to you or whether you disagree with some of my answers. That's okay. All right. Well, God bless you, folks. And let's have a word of prayer. Father, we thank you for the time to come together and to look into your word and see this book of beginnings and how you are working in things, and we pray that your blessing will be upon the folks of Faith Baptist Church as they read and grow in the grace and knowledge of you. Please teach us, Lord. And we ask these things in Jesus' name. Amen. As we move forward to the next week's reading, just kind of be paying attention that there's things that the curse in Genesis is significant, especially that curse upon the woman. There's difficulty in childbearing. You're going to see that happen a lot. You're going to see difficulty in relationships between man and women and mistreatment and that type of thing. You're going to see Jacob's family is just an absolute mess of sin and injustice and deception. And we live in a sin-wrecked world. So just be kind of looking for those things and remembering back. Hey, there's some Wyckopham boys. All right. God bless y'all. You have a good week.